And welcome to all of you joining us from wherever you are in the world. I'm so excited because we're just about to speak to world-renowned psychologist, author, and director of the Parnell Institute for Attachment-Focused EMDR, Dr. Laurel Parnell. Just right before we start our International Women's Conference, which starts on Thursday. So, Laurel, a really warm welcome to you today. I don't know if it's morning there or afternoon or evening, wherever you are.
Yeah, it's morning here. Well, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, pleasure. And we're just about to hear from you on our women's conference in the next couple of days, but I wanted to catch up with you. First of all, I'm a bit of an EMDR groupie, and I can't wait to start my training with your institute. Tell me a little bit about, how come you started attachment-focused EMDR, and why did you decide to sort of move away from the sort of standard EMDR protocol as such?
Well, I was trained in 1991 by the developer of EMDR, Francine Shapiro. And in those days, there was a lot of room for adaptations, for development, for innovation. And she encouraged it. She trusted the therapist in those days. And she kept saying, EMDR is not a cookie cutter. Don't do it the same with everybody. It's client-centered. Well, what's happened over the years is kind of the way EMDR has been developing in the standard way. It's become very rigid. It's become very dogmatic, very scripted. And those of us who've been working with it, so I was trained in 1991. I've been teaching and training people in EMDR since 1995. And I've seen within the organization, the international organization, increasing rigidity that is very left brain, which is not what we do with trauma. With trauma, of course, trauma is on the right side of the brain, and attachment is about right brain to right brain connection, attunement, resonance, all of that that's so essential for healing on this deeper level. And what I was finding, it was becoming more and more left brain. And I've always worked with complex trauma with people who were abused and neglected in childhood. And what I saw early on is I needed to begin to adapt this. I needed to adapt the structure of it. I needed to make it easy. I needed to make it flow more. I needed to connect with my clients and make them feel safe. So I needed to add more safety. I needed to add more time to make the connection. And so over the years, and it was a group of us who were trained in the early days and worked for the Institute, that we knew that we needed to make adaptations, and that was okay. But over the years, it's just become more and more rigid. And what I found is that our adaptations, really, we took a different road. I didn't realize we're on such a different road until I get people coming to my trainings who were trained in the standard way, and I'm just shocked because they're not able to use it with their clients. They're trying to, it's like you only have a hammer and a screwdriver, and they're using the same tools on everybody in the same way. And then the clients don't like it. They don't want to come back. They don't feel seen or held or attuned to. So using what we know about attachment research and what is important in repair. I've had workshops with both Daniel Siegel and Alan Shore, and hearing them speak, I'm going, oh, okay, now I find support for the adaptations we're making. So several years ago, Daniel Siegel took my advanced course in EMDR, and he began to refer people to me, and he termed what I was doing attachment-focused EMDR. That was, I thought it was just, using EMDR that was more client-centered, and he called it attachment-focused. So I thought, what makes it attachment-focused? And then I began to see, okay, here are the elements that make it attachment-focused. And so that's where I developed what I call the 5 basic principles of attachment-focused EMDR. And I've written a book about it. We do trainings in this, and it's just grown and developed. And we found that so many people want what we're teaching. They're like hungry for it, because when they were taught in the standard way, they could only work with a small population. And the way we teach, it just broadened the group of people that could be helped.
Mm. And I mean, I'm curious, and as I said before, I can't wait to do your training. We've only got a short period of time. What are those 5 different adaptations, like just in a nutshell? Are you able to kind of name them very briefly?
Oh yeah, I can. So the first one is client safety. We've got to create safety. So safety can have to do with adding in more resources so the person feels stronger inside before we throw them in the deep end of the trauma pool, right? So we want to create safety. So increase safety. This is also something that Alan Shore talked about. Any good therapy that is attachment focused, you have to have safety, because then the client can drop into these deeper places. So we emphasize safety. It's client-centered. So whatever we do, we're adapting according to the needs of the individual. Rather than imposing a protocol on someone, we know what the basic principles of EMDR are. And so we're discovering what's going to work with this individual. So it's tailored to each individual. It's respecting the integrity of each human being. And there's such a variety of expressions of what people need. So it's client-centered. And that can mean how long, what type of bilateral simulation we use, where we sit with them, the type of resources we use, all the kinds of adaptations. And we're always asking, what do you need? What feels right to you? So it's always adapting. It's about the therapeutic relationship. The therapeutic relationship is the foundation of the therapy itself. So this is where you want to have a connection with your client. You want them to feel safe with you. You have that connection. It can get broken and then it gets repaired. And as I'm going to talk about on Thursday, in working with adults who've been abused in childhood, this is absolutely essential. The therapeutic relationship is also part of the healing, because they're creating new neural pathways in the relationship itself. So when they're having a positive experience with a therapist, that's a new experience. It's going in to change their nervous system. It's a kind of corrective emotional experience. So that's so very important. Now, if you're using standard EMDR and you're imposing something on the client, that can be damaging to them, and it can make them not trust the therapist or the therapy. So this is where the therapeutic relationship is really foundational. And also with the EMDR, as you know, clients can experience very strong emotional releases. They need to feel safe with the therapist to be able to ride through those big waves of emotion. And then the next one is modifications of the standard protocol. So we found the need to modify and streamline it. So instead of left brain, left brain, left brain, right brain, right brain, left brain, in a lot of taking them out of their experience, we activate the memory network and we just get them in there and go. But we've created safety before we do that. So it's much more streamlined. It's much simpler. It doesn't make clients feel objectified and jerked around. And it maintains that connection and attunement with the client, which is so very important. So I don't want to get into too much more technical information about that, but it's streamlined, and but it holds the integrity of EMDR at the same time, because there is a structure to this that's containing and comforting, because we're not just doing free associative processing where they can go off who knows where. We really have a structure where they process and come back, process and come back. And then we're using resourcing, the use of imagination and bilateral stimulation, both for stabilization and ego strengthening, but also to repair developmental deficits. So this is the big innovation, if you want. So what EMDR does is, with EMDR, what we do is we activate the memory network where the trauma is stored, and we add alternating bilateral stimulation, be it eye movements or auditory stimulation or tapping, whatever you're using. But it sets off that accelerated information processing where they then move to health and wholeness. Well, in order to do that, they have to have enough ego strength. They have to have affect tolerance. They have to be stable enough to go into those places. Well, and they also have to have an activated memory network. They have to have some place you can find that has emotional charge. Well, what happens when the client has an absence of, where they were neglected, they were never loved, they were never held, they never had any stability growing up? So you have an absence of, but not a lot of emotional charge about that. In a way, they're missing this internal structure. This was the aha I had, and what it is we activate memory networks using imagination and bilateral stimulation that have to do with developmental repair, create new mother, new father, new family, what they didn't get and they needed. So we have them imagine in a kind of active imagination what they need, and we use bilateral stimulation as they're doing that. So we're laying down new tracks of healthy relating and repair, and it completely changes people's nervous systems. It provides that internal structure that they didn't have growing up. And so for some clients, the repair is what's predominant because they don't have emotional regulation because they never had that. And for other people, they need more of the trauma work. But when you get that internal structure in through doing the developmental repair, then for these clients, you can then do some of that trauma work that you couldn't do before because they didn't have the structure to hold that high affect that comes. So this is where we're adapting, we're listening, we're using EMDR, we're also doing this repair work. And that's kind of the 5 basic principles.
And it sounds, as you've been saying, it sounds really relational. It sounds sort of really person-centered. It's almost like personalized in a way. And it makes me think about this, this Women Trauma and Mental Health Conference that we have coming up. And, 1 in 3 women have actually been either sexually abused or physically abused. The rates of diagnosis for trauma disorders in women are, significantly higher in women than in men. And this type of more sort of relational EMDR, Laurel, seems to really fit. I'm not sort of saying it's just for women because it's not, but it seems to really fit into some of the things that women are dealing with, what they've been through, where they're going, just kind of repair some of those networks that have been affected by, different types of trauma.
I think, you're absolutely right. And I think we're talking a lot in the United States about systemic racism, but there's also systemic misogyny. And, you find it from the time little girls are growing up that, you're taught not to hurt other people's feelings. And, girls want to be liked, or they're not seen as strong as little boys are. And there's all kinds of ways in which girls are put down. And it's in the media. The media is, you'll see who are the news reporters. You'll have this old guy who's not very attractive and a young woman who has to be really attractive. So as women get older, they get put out to pasture. They lose their credibility. They lose. And so what's that? That's saying that your worth exists only in how you look and how you please people. So that is very, very deep in the culture everywhere in the world that I know of, that where women are not prized as much as males are. And so for women to find their voice, to find their power, to find their strength all along from little all the way up is really so important. And to find those places where these negative self beliefs got set in. Who told you you weren't good enough? Where did you get that message? When I was a child, my mother said, let the boys win. Let the boys win. I'm like, no. I knew when I was little, I wasn't going to let the boys win so they could feel better about themselves. But that's the kind of message the girls get. If you're too good, you won't be liked. So not only, and I think with some of the sexual assaults, for women to really understand both that they're vulnerable, it's not their fault, and that we do have to protect ourselves, and we do have to speak out, and we do have to connect to other women.
Absolutely. And I want to just go back a little bit. One of the reasons why I decided to launch the conference last year is to really find a voice for women, to sort of have a movement of a global sort of healing in terms of women, trauma, and mental health. And this year, when I sat back and I thought, what am I going to be this sort of, middle class director of PESI UK therapist running a conference? I thought, absolutely not. We've got to do this. I've got to be really coming from a values basis of equality. So Dr. Ebony Webb, woman of color, is going to be my co-host as well as my partner in crime for this. And I'm so delighted that she is on the conference. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to join us today. But Laura, talk a little bit about, you mentioned, we talked briefly about sort of misogynism. I want to talk a little bit about sort of systemic racism and perhaps sort of how attachment-focused EMDR can help with, beliefs that terrible things that people have to believe because of the socialization of what, BIPOC folk have been through over the last hundreds of years. Do you see that coming up with perhaps some of your trainers, your clinicians, in terms of helping heal the damage that has been caused by society with, some of these communities and our friends and colleagues?
Absolutely. And we just had a conference my institute did that will also be available, where Dr. Wendy Ashley presented on using EMDR, adapting EMDR for the African American population. And some of what I found over the years, and I think this is from my client population, my African American client population, working with racism and how that gets internalized. I think, and this is also for misogyny, for any of these places where we've been mistreated by this outer system, we internalize those beliefs about ourselves. Somehow I'm not good enough. I can't hurt other people's feelings. I'm less than, I'm shameful. Any of those negative beliefs. So what we can do is look at where they've taken those beliefs in to be true about themselves and look at where that got set in, right? It could be set in from the families, because families is so sad to see this intergenerational trauma and the acceptance of we are less than because of how they were treated. So let's get at how that's been taken in. Let's work intergenerationally, working on the traumas that have brought in from past generations. Let's work on where those beliefs got set into your life, into your nervous system, and let's reprocess those and free them up. So I think in life, we're all, everybody has traumas, little ones and big ones. It's when we take them in and we believe that this means I'm less than. When we clear that out and then we're still mistreated, it hurts to be mistreated, but we don't believe I deserve to be mistreated. You see what I'm saying? So that's where I wanna undo the beliefs, my beliefs, or I mean the client's beliefs that they deserve this, they are less than. Let's clear that out so that when somebody mistreats you, even though it hurts, it doesn't reinforce the belief I deserve this or I'm less than. So that's one way. Another way is to really resource and strengthen. Use people from history, ancestors, family, spiritual resources to connect with, and using bilateral stimulation to really integrate and take in what they give you. One of my heroes for myself, because I find that when I find people historically who have been able to overcome and live through and keep their spirit intact through great traumas, I find that they're very inspirational to me. And so Frederick Douglass is one of those people. I discovered him 20, 30 years ago. I found his autobiography in a bookstore, a used bookstore. And I just found, oh my gosh, I heard his voice and I was so moved by him. So finding people from history, ancestors who have survived, not focusing on the traumas, but focusing on their inner resilience, that can give us something that we can carry forward. And then also doing meditation, like loving kindness meditation, because systemic racism it's everywhere. It's so much in the cultures that it's hard to even discern it, because it's in how we live. It's what we're living in all the time. So it's more, the antidote can be really connecting to loving kindness, sending loving kindness to oneself. And you can add bilateral stimulation to really take that in more fully. May I be peaceful, may I be happy, may I be filled with loving kindness. I deserve to be loved. I deserve to be held in esteem. So really doing that, and really doing that in a regular basis, can begin to turn that a bit, because it's so deep everywhere. And then working with the generations, through imagination and bilateral stimulation to heal some of what the generations carried. Certainly in America, the history of slavery and Reconstruction is so horrific, and it's deep in the foundation of the country, and that reconciliation and acknowledgement and healing absolutely needs to happen.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I wanted to ask, because sometimes I think EMDR can be seen, certainly in the UK and maybe Europe, because it's sort of NICE approved here, it's usually used in some ways, not all the time, but for single incident trauma. But what I hear you talking about right now, is sort of more that developmental element, more some of those beliefs that are kind of below the surface. They're not kind of,
Yeah.
you don't say, well, what's your deepest, darkest limiting belief? And someone will just goes, well, it's whatever. You're talking about sort of, deeper structures in the psyche, which, I guess, would they unfold over time, or how in attachment-focused EMDR do you begin to work with that, or do they just surface sort of naturally? Do you want to say something about that?
Oh, this is a really big topic. So I think this is where we really expanded out with attachment-focused EMDR. So EMDR, most of the research on EMDR is on single incident trauma. Because it's easy to research, right? You have one bad thing that happens, a car accident or something,
Yeah.
and then you have 3 to 6 sessions and boom, it's gone. To be able to do research on something like low self-esteem or anxiety or depression that has its roots in early childhood traumas and lots of those small things about being undermined, I'm not good enough, things like that. You
Yeah.
can't do research on that. How do you get at that? Because you're not just doing one thing, and it's not short-term therapy typically, right? So how we work is we use what's called the bridging technique. And this is where you can take a negative belief or an example of when that showed up. So let's say somebody, and I'm not talking about a big trauma. It might be somebody just put them down, like didn't give eye contact or help the next person in line, or something that was a kind of aggressive thing, but wasn't a violent, I'm going to die kind of experience. So let's say they're in line and they were ignored, and they let somebody else go ahead of them because of the color of their skin. And so they're angry, they're sad, they're upset. And so they come in and they want to work on this. They said, this is an example of what I've been living with. It's like all those little cuts that lead to just feeling awful.
Yeah.
So you ask, when you think of that, what comes up? And they say, I'm angry, I'm sad, I feel ashamed. Okay. And then you go, where do you feel that in your body? And they describe where that is. It's in my face. And what thoughts or beliefs, the immediate thoughts or beliefs? I'm worthless. So when you hear something like I'm worthless, that means they've taken it personally, and they didn't say this person is an idiot.
Yeah.
They took
They've
I'm worthless.
identified with it. Yeah.
They have, because they've got receptor sites. Also, they have receptor sites for these negative beliefs. So then I'll say, trace it back in time, go back as far as you can without censoring it. And then we go back, eyes closed, no bilateral stimulation, and they land in an early experience. So let's say they're in school, they've got their hand up, the teacher's not calling on them. And they're sitting there, they have the answer, but they're not being called on. And they're never called on and they can feel it's the color of their skin, or maybe the teacher says something. That's maybe one of those early experiences that set in that I'm not good enough. And so that's what we call targeting and reprocess that early experience. And then they clear that out, they process that, and go back to that. You finish the early one. I am good enough. Problem was in the teacher. I'm fine as I am. Then you go back to the grocery store thing where they, they let somebody go in front of them, and then they go, oh, that person just is stupid. I'm fine as I am. And then you say, go with that. And then maybe imagine a future situation. And there may be many, many, many of these early experiences that create this belief, these schemas of I'm not good enough, I'm not valuable. And those we can begin to work on, because then it's obvious that they have value and the problem is outside, not inside. So that's some of the stuff we do with attachment-focused EMDR.
Yeah. And it just sounds so important at the sort of point in time where we are, whether we're talking women, whether we're talking race, whether we talk what's happening in the wider world. Laura, I'm really excited to hear your presentation on Thursday. I absolutely can't wait. And I just wanted to say, thank you to all our viewers from all over the world, in all countries. If you want to hear more about Laurel Parnell and attachment-focused EMDR, do join us for our women's conference. Also check out Laurel Parnell's training, and hopefully we will see you on Thursday, kicking off UK time at 2 o'clock for our women's conference. Thank you so much, Laurel.
Thank you.